All right, welcome to part 3 of my Images and Words sort of celebration, the Dream Theater record that came out 30 years ago. Um, I've had a chance to talk to John. I've had Petrucci, founder, lyricist, guitarist, producer, and James LaBrie, who has been the front man and vocalist for Dream Theater since their sophomore effort, which is Images and Words. And so lastly, I want to do a listen. It's a record, of course, that I've listened to many times. I'm going to try and listen to it fresh, objectively, and just share thoughts. There'll probably be some stories interwoven along the way. But in some ways, I'm doing this for me. It's an important record to me. It changed the course of my life in many ways as a aspiring vocalist. Where I decided to move, some of the vocational changes I made, and certainly the North Star for how I thought about music and how I wanted to participate in music. So that's what this is about. I've had a chance already to share some of the accolades that the record has accumulated, so I won't go too much into that because you'll have heard that already. But I do want to get into the actual playing of the record. And I'll do some start and stop here to talk through. But let me frame it this way. I've shared bits of this story before, but hopefully can be more holistic here this time. I had come into rock and metal kind of late. I'd been listening to a lot of other kinds of music I still like and enjoy. The new wave stuff, Tears for Fears and Duran Duran and those bands. But then I started to listen to some rock and metal, and very quickly became sort of what dominated most of my listening habits, at least for a while. And I had decided I wanted to be in a band pretty badly. I'd been singing in a cappella choir and things like that through high school. And so I wasn't unfamiliar with voice, but certainly not at the altitude that I was about to hear it with Images and Words. And so I'd gotten into a couple of bands, they pretty garage bandy stuff, fun, and I have great memories of them, but never really even played out in clubs around the city. I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah. And then I finally, answered an ad for another band. Interestingly, the band rehearsed in this old bank, and there was a vault. Literally the vault for the bank, and it's huge. I mean, huge in terms of a vault. It was kind of long and narrow, but greatly sound reinforced for all of that. And I went and listened to the band play. It was very different. It was more of a progressive band, not as deeply metal. The band that sounded, most like what we were aspiring to was probably Queensryche. But the guys in the band were very, differentiated in the kinds of music they listened to. And Dream Theater was one of those. And so I heard I went and listened to the band play and later came and joined the band. I went and wrote a song to one of their instrumental tunes, and they liked it and they liked my voice. So they invited me to join, and I did. And we grew for the next couple of years playing around the city. And I was working at a parking lot. I had gotten my degree, but hadn't really put it to any real use. And I was working at a parking lot as selling tickets for cars to park. And but it's a great job to read. I love to read. A great job to listen to music and concentrate on writing lyrics and other efforts for the band. And the guys showed up, and I was just about to get off my shift, and they said, "Hey, the new Dream Theater record's out." I'd kind of heard some of the stuff off when Dream and Day Unite, but said, "Hey, let's go over to the mall." So we walked over to the mall. I picked up a copy of Images and Words, went back. We all piled in my Jeep, and started driving around the city just listening to it. And I've told this story even to John and James, but I had this sort of instant love-hate relationship with the record because it was brilliant, vocally breathtaking, instrumentally just so ambitious and well executed. Lyrically, the themes were, meaningful without being doctrinaire. And so it was just this holistic effort that really kind of took me off my feet. At the same time, as a fledgling vocalist, it was a little demoralizing for me because it was the place where I was aspiring to be. And James did it with such power and ease and resonance in a way that uniquely his own. And I would make the argument that if not one of the best voices in rock and metal that we've ever had. That's of course a bias because music and vocals in particular are so subjective. Nevertheless, I studied music for a long time, studied voice in particular for a long time. Actually more just voice. When I moved to Seattle, I began to train with a guy by the name of David Kyle, who taught Jeff Tate from Queensryche and Ann Wilson from Heart and Lane Staley from Alice in Chains. And so this guy knew his stuff, and I thought, he could help me get to where I wanted to be. And going there was a consequence in some part of listening to this record and realizing that there was so much headroom for me to grow and where I was hoping to be as a vocalist. And so I got over the demoralization of, how far I had to go and began to listen and work harder as a vocalist. And then over the years, I've been fortunate, as folks who see some of my videos and some of the interviews I've done, to meet the guys in the band as a consequence of working at Microsoft and in Xbox and doing music marketing and promotions where I got to feature artists. And that was a great fun opportunity for me because I got to treat the guys to some pretty good dinners in Manhattan. We made some memories, and then of course folks know that I ended up doing the Astonishing novel, working with John, and have just been an evangelist for the group, a defender, at times when it seemed like some of the guys were getting hazed pretty bad, and I think unnecessarily. And part of that's friendship. Part of it's, I think, just trying to have an awareness of voice and the music. And so for all of those reasons, this 30 years I've stayed connected to the music and the band, and I'm a fan of all of it. I'm a fan of how they've grown and changed and the different things they've tried to do. Of course, there's always favorites, albums, favorite tracks, that sort of thing. But there's just not anything I don't like, and I just have sort of connected to the music in a really fundamental and foundational way. So for all of those reasons, I want to do this listen. It's not a traditional reaction. I'm not going to sort of make faces and that sort of thing. I want to listen to it and remark upon it, and probably have some stories that'll get called to mind as I go through it. So with that as kind of a bit of a setup, let me introduce my guest, Images and Words. It doesn't fit in the frame, but I guess that's okay. I didn't want to cut off any of the image. I wanted folks to see it. So for anybody who isn't very familiar with Dream Theater or this record, I encourage you to look for it. I'm not suggesting that you're going to connect to it as deeply as I have, but there is so much to commend it, and that's part of what I'm hoping this listen will do. So with that as my framing, let's start. First track is Pull Me Under. This was a single. It's the song that blew up at radio. There is some information that suggests it was sort of a late addition to the record, not originally part of the track list, but it started to get rotation at radio on MTV. There was a radio edit, an MTV edit. I'm not going to play those, not because I don't think they're fine. They're fine, but they're not complete. And I don't think they sort of represent what the band was trying to convey, with the parts that have been edited out. So this is Pull Me Under from Images and Words. Okay, so sorry to stop so soon, but that's kind of the purpose of the listen through. That chorusing effect you're hearing, I heard John talk about this. They did this before Pro Tools, before a lot of the sophisticated plugins that we have today. And to achieve that, John played the song multiple times, and then they changed the tape speed on on the various takes in order to create this sort of really sort of mythical and deep chorusing, which is, I mean, it's the signature sound from the record. I mean, it begins the whole album. What I love, one of the things I love about Dream Theater is they're never in a hurry just to get you to the opening line. There is an effort in a lot of sort of commercial music to get you very quickly to the vocalist as who is often the centerpiece of the song. But Dream Theater really cares about the composition. And so this sort of long build with the layering of instruments and increased variance on melodies and counterpoint was kind of new to me. I mean, I'd heard things like this, but the fact that they were taking their time to bring me into this soundscape, I just immediately fell in love with it because I'm one of those people, like I love essays. I love thoughts that are considered and built upon, kind of at odds with a lot of the consumption of our messaging and media today, which is so abbreviated. And that has its place. I'm not trying to throw shade on Twitter or Instagram. Those are viable outlets for what they are. But this Dream Theater, a lot of their music is longer, as fans know, sometimes called epic. And they're the great epics that are 20 and 20 plus minutes. But an average song is longer than most radio songs, which is why they did those radio edits. And so this flies in the face of convention. And so at the time Dream Theater came out, when grunge was starting to hit, Metallica, was still obviously growing, but had a fan base. It was very different. And very different is always the best way to begin a career. It's rare to see a band have the longevity that Dream Theater has, who begin doing something that somebody else is already doing. Okay, so this, we're in it over a minute now, and the layering continues, and the payoff, not payoff necessarily, but where the song's going to just kind of make this shift is about to hit. And so you've, like, the delayed gratification works to great effect here. See how the keys come in there on, I think those are 16th notes. And, it's adding some additional tension that'll come in with some release when the vocals come in. A lot of the instrumentation underneath is going to remain frenetic. But one of the beauties of what they do vocally and what James just delivers in spades is these effortless melodic lines that sit atop this frenetic instrumentation. And by frenetic, I don't mean without cohesion. They do cohere. They're even melodical, but there's a lot of movement. And so there's this interesting sort of relationship between the vocal lines and the instrumentation that, of course, belongs to not just James. the vocals are lyrically and melodically written by different members of the group. But James participates in that, and he certainly is the one that delivers it, and delivers it with aplomb, as they say.
Lost in the sky, clouds roll by and I roll with them. Arrows fly, seas increase and then fall again. This world is spinning around me. This world is spinning without me, and every day since future.
Okay, so the lyrical theme's established. Kevin Moore wrote lyrics for this tune. It's ultimately, in some ways, founded on the idea in Shakespeare's Hamlet. As we come to at the coda, there's this sort of slightly challenging part to hear the distinction in the lyrics. That is, oh, that this too solid flesh would melt. And of course, that's part of one of Hamlet's great soliloquies. But it speaks to this theme around life and, having a desire to shuffle off this mortal coil, to, reference Shakespeare again. Life's challenging. But what's cool about this, and so much of this album, as I was talking to John the other day about, is it's ultimately hopeful. And this is actually a narrative device that I love, which is, and certainly very common, but Dream Theater uses this very effectively, which is to take you through some darkness, and then deliver this hope, rays of hope. It's one of the reasons I think I connect to the music. I think light is brighter once you see it through the dark. So some of the language and lyrics here speak to ideas that are, a little bit dark. Every breath brings me one less to my last. But when we get to the refrains, the choruses, we'll hear how they move on from that. One of the things that I also noticed immediately when I got this record was Kevin Moore, how the facility he had to write on a keyboard that had sometimes guitar stylings, phrasings that I don't think are always easy for a keyboard to pull off. But he had this sensibility, this melodic sensibility and rhythmic sensibility that's uniquely his own. That's the reason, there are some fans who desperately miss him. Jordan is a good friend of mine and is a world-class talent, and has his own distinctive style that he's imprinted on the band for most of its career. So he's to be commended for so much. He's a brilliant mind. But I just want to acknowledge Kevin for what he's done on this record. And I believe he's a healthcare professional now, mental health care professional now. So still contributing meaningfully to the world.
What's the spell falling gives no meaning to it all. Not today, not yet tomorrow, then some other day.
Okay, that line is not easy to sing. It sits at a kind of an altitude that has got, lends it some power here. But to do it and to articulate it is not easy. And the other thing I remember immediately hearing is when he drives through, and then when he lands on some of these vowels, there's a fullness, a resonance in them that is it's really hard to hear in other vocalists. I mean, every great vocalist has something unique, reasons why we love them. But even in the world, and he had some grit here. We heard it, and he does more of that on successive records. But the thing he does that other vocalists who largely sing clean, without the grit, without the roughness in their voice. And I won't invoke other names because I don't want anybody's ire for comparisons. But as good as other vocalists are with range, with pitch, with control, with a deeply oscillating vibrato that is sometimes considered operatic, but certainly theatrical or powerful, is James has this gear or this ability to hit some of these vowels in a way that just makes them sound so full and so big. And it's really rare to hear. And I remember when I heard this, it was like, oh, that's another level, what he's doing there. And that's how quickly I fell in love with the man's voice. He also uses his glissando, like this movement in and out of his tones, so beautifully. It's part of what helps it feel effortless, but connected. Note to note. It's not robotic. It's very sort of humanly expressive. This is the other thing I remember sort of clicking with me when I first started listening to this record is Dream Theater does not slouch on bridges, even really small connecting bridges between parts that are often unique. They don't just transition by changing a drum fill or adding a drum fill at the end of a part, which is a fine songwriting technique. They go this extra mile that gives the song variance, makes it feel fresh as you move through it. And, as a music head and listening to a lot of music, sometimes the anticipation of, part change, certain structures that are tried and true, but can become sort of routine or repetitious. This songwriting tool that they have employed from the beginning is part of the reason I love them. The other thing I wanted to mention before I forget, I think I mentioned this to John or remembered it with John, is before Kevin added Pull Me Under, which we're about to hear in the chorus, it was called Oliver's Twist. John gave a funny story about that in my conversation with him. You'll have to listen to on why he thinks they were using that name. Okay, that, right? Those vowels are so bright without being tinny or nasally. And the ascension is so effortless. The vibrato is so smooth and even. And I think that not just for this, but certainly as a meaningful part of it, it's what grabbed attention when this song started to get into some rotation. They're just not a lot of guys doing this kind of singing, and certainly a raft of vocalists who came after, including me, doing everything they could to figure out how this was done, replicating it. No voice sounds like another voice. So, with the exception of those like Vegas entertainers who are not just vocalists, but mimics, and some vocalists who've gone into bands as replacement vocalists who are able to sort of carry off an imitation. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way. Like, I think a lot of fans want to hear the version of the song that they heard on the record as close as they can. Arnel Pineda, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Amazing singer as he's doing Steve Perry. And I saw him live, and that's what I wanted to hear. Arnell doesn't sound like Steve when he's singing his own stuff. But live, and when you're going for nostalgia's sake, in part to hear an album, a record, a band, that's an experience you want. With that in mind, how challenging would it be to truly find a replacement for James? I've seen guys who can sing and they have a bit of his tone. I don't know if it's their natural tone. My instinct is that it's them doing what they can to sound like James. And I think that's an homage. I don't think that's trying to, borrowed glory or stolen glory, whatever the phrase is. I think it's respect. I think it's love and wanting to pay tribute. And that's the way I regard it. But even those guys don't really have the same tone. They don't achieve the same thing. And that's because it's a biological instrument, so it's going to sound different. And that's fine. I went through my own bout of doing everything I could to see if I could sound like James, mostly as an exercise for trying to figure out how he achieves those vowel sounds and the resonance. But abandoned, the thing you have to do, of course, is you have to try and lean into what you're good at, what you can do. But, it's one of the things that I think we remark on and we find unique and beautiful about when we hear an album like this, a vocalist like this. Perfect compliment for the rest of the band, doing something so amazing and doing it without sounding as though he's having to push into it, if that makes sense. One of the things I remarked upon this to James, in many of the songs, and I've kind of talked about this a little bit, the ease with which he kind of gets these notes, even when he's singing something like this, which is a verse, and I'll talk about the instrumentation in a moment. He's at an altitude that, like I was just listening to some other vocalists earlier today, beautiful tone. They sing with a lot of intensity and a lot of them use a lot of this grit, and it sounds great. Great singers. But they're also like at least 5 or 6 whole steps down from where James is singing some of these verses, and it's deceptive. And so I think that it's important for us to remember, like the blessing we have of hearing a vocalist who is doing something like this, and sitting at a place where other vocalists nearly top out in terms of range. Now, of course, the argument is, of course, that's what they need, because the rest of the band is at top form too. These are all, arguably the best, instrumentalists at their instrument. But James is worthy of being among them. And now, beneath it, the instrumentation. What I love about Dream Theater is there are bands that are just good with riffs, and we love them. One of the things that's really distinctive, not only about Dream Theater, there are the bands that do this, but there are lines, the riffs, like the rhythm riffs that are underneath it are melodic. They're rhythmic, but they're melodic in and of themselves. And here you hear Petrucci doing this, and it's part of the layering and complexity of the music that I think fans love. See how it's very nearly just counterpoint with what James is doing, what John's got going there. Also, I mean, I can't, there'll be other moments where I'll speak to this, but, Portnoy was also kind of a revelation. I'm not going to get into debates about Portnoy and Mangini. Both of those guys are amazing, and I have mad respect for Mangini. I've met him. He's not only a beautiful person and human, but funny as hell. But his mind works amazing. like just amazing. I did an interview with him. If you're interested, it's on my channel. But we can't lose sight of the fact that Portnoy helped found the band, and what he's doing here in catching these figures with the other instrumentation and driving the song forward and doing the music, performing the music, and giving the music a life that, again, we didn't see much of at this time. There's Neil Peart, of course, and I know that he's an influence and hero of Portnoy's, but a lot of the drummers, good as they were, weren't doing the injecting the level of complexity and musicality that Portnoy was doing on this record. And this was the sophomore album. So big ups to Mike.
Every step brings me closer to my last.
I actually when I saw them tour this in a club, and I was standing right in front of James. It was Take the Time. He actually put the mic down. I was singing every word, you know. He put the mic down, let me sing a line, which was a thrill. Portnoy came out because he saw how into it I was. He gave me one of his drumsticks. I've got it around here someplace. I believe it was wrapped in purple. There's going to be a hiccup right there. I apologize. Streamlabs kind of tweaked on me, so there's a little hiccup there. Apologize, but we're still going to get most of it. Okay, there's that powerful, just amazing chorus topper. Lyrically, I know that John was raised Catholic, and he deliberately avoids influencing how people think about the lyrics and the music. Wants them to have their own experience. He never has, never will preach to anybody about anything. But some of their lyrical content, and here it's Kevin Moore, but it just kind of comes to mind. It does trade on spiritual ideas, and there's a little bit of that here. I mean, only until your will is done. You know, who's he talking about? The great news, of course, for all of us is we get to interpret that the way we want. But there's a little bit like if you're thinking about mortality and you're thinking about shuffling off this mortal coil. Framing it in terms of the character, even if you just see it as a fiction, and have, you know, no particular observance of belief, which is fine. There's still like as a thought exercise, someone who does maybe have some sort of belief system, thinking about how they are, meeting these challenges and hopefully overcoming them. And that's part of what, the hope idea that I was talking about earlier that's existent in the choruses that then take us from some of the I believe it's called a thanatopsis. It's this rumination on death into a place that is how you then meet that challenge and rise above it. There's a lot of great stories, even if in Scripture, even if you just regard that as fantasy and stories, there's still stories about overcoming, these kinds of mortal challenges, and those can be inspiring regardless of who you are. It's in the video. I won't be showing it here, but part of the video that is to the radio edit has a character in it that tying knots, looks almost like crucifying himself, if not only hanging himself. There's this aversion almost to the sun, so you get, maybe it's almost like an undead character. I think it's a little ambiguous. I've never heard any definitive commentary on it. It probably exists. And I'm sure that there are those of you who may listen to this who are big Dream Theater fans and know this record way better than I do. So I'm happy to have you comment and educate me on things I don't know or get wrong. This is really just kind of my experience and my reaction. But that video does have this imagery of clocks. So we get this sense of time moving. This character who's sitting on his bed, he's clearly got some dark thoughts in his head. And the Sacred Heart kind of thing, the heart wrapped in barbed wire and a flame, is another of the images that exist in the video. So a lot to kind of digest there, but I think it aggregates to some sort of mortal challenge, some sort of the heart in despair, the need to sort of, or the desire to make some sort of change against challenge, and maybe doing it initially in a way that is kind of final. And of course, this exact idea plays out in some of the other songs that we'll be listening to on the record. But lyrically, anyway, triumphing over that despair. How tasty that was. It was melodic, and it never rushed. This was part of the great value of Kevin's influence in the songwriting. Here's one of those transitions. Now, the person I haven't mentioned is Ma Young, which is a shame on me. There is, it's almost like an in-joke with, at least with some of the Dream Theater fans I know, that this record and other records maybe didn't mix bass as definitively as they could have. I don't know if it's a comment on the producer or what. Certainly, I think I would have turned the bass up just a little bit. But regardless of that, Ma Young is there, and I think sometimes his parts are hidden because there's this relationship in the rhythm section between the drums and the bass. And those guys do so many musical figures that are locked together. And so you kind of get this punch that belongs to both of them simultaneously. But apart from that, if you listen, the bass is there, of course, and it's as magical and unique as all the rest of the players. Dream Theater fans know this. They have high regard for John, who is the most reserved personality in the band, by which I mean he does the fewest interviews. He's the most soft-spoken. But make no mistake, I've had the opportunity to speak to John Ma Young multiple times. There was a time when my wife was suffering pretty bad with multiple sclerosis, and I was at a concert, and he and I talked for probably 30 minutes. He was giving me ideas of natural things that we could try and help her cope. I think he had some experience with someone in his life, and other really poignant things I probably shouldn't share, just because they're kind of private. But this is not to suggest that he and I are like friends that are always sharing messaging. I want to be clear, but the times when we have spoken have been poignant to me because the things he's said have in few words have kind of gone a long ways. And that same is that I share that because that sensibility is part of, I think, how his personality is reflected in the music. It's always there. It's always unique. It doesn't call attention to itself, but without it, the music is not what the music is. There's no mistaking him as probably an unsung bass prodigy hero in the bass playing world. He's not as loud. He's not as present in terms of like his personality and digital footprint, those kinds of things. But that's in keeping with his nature. I have great regard for John Mayung. And here's the thing. One of the choices that James makes, because he has command sufficient to deliver all of the vowels in their dictionary pronunciations. I remember hearing some slights on James for compromising the vowels. I think almost as if, he can't hit the restrictive vowel like a tight E or I, which is nonsense. He does it all the time. There's this choice that he makes, like he does in these choruses, to open those up. It doesn't, for people who are listening, and who care, because there of course are music listeners for whom the lyrics don't really matter that much. But I'm not one of those. I care a great deal about what the lyrics are doing. There's no mistaking what he's saying. Part of it, we've heard it in the refrain before. It's contextually with the song. We understand what's being talked about if we're paying attention to the lyrics. So there's never any concern that people won't understand what he's saying. So there's this choice he makes to open those vowels up. Instead of will with a tight I, he'll well, and it's a little bit more open. And in that, there's this different experience of the vowel. This fullness that I talked about before that he can achieve and delivers in a unique way. I love how James does this. I think it's a vocal choice. It's part of his style, and it's fine if you disagree or you don't like it. This is my reaction video. But I just wanted to clarify. I've heard James. I apologize for that. I've heard James sing all the vowels all the ways. He has the capability. And by the way, there are efforts to kind of besmirk James in his later career, which are nonsense. I'm happy to have those debates. He can still do all the stuff. He's a 50-plus-year-old vocalist now, so he has to take care of his voice in a different way than a 20-year-old guy does. But he still has all the facility. He can reach it if and when he needs and wants to. I know that's true because I've seen it. I've heard it. But I just wanted to comment here because this is the first cut off of this record that got in rotation. It's the first track on the record. And he makes these stylistic choices that are part of the signature of the tune that helped break them. So good for him. All right. So I think I got some outro here. Just the variance on the keys there, hitting different emphasis. That principle, of course, I think I mentioned it before, but it's something that's repeats in Dream Theater composition. Here we go. So that abrupt ending at first, many fans or listeners thought, oh, well, something happened. No, I think the idea of it is that the abruptness is like life. Most often we don't know when it's going to end. And so there's a art imitating life or content imitating theme that's going on there, which is really cool. And again, it's, that this too solid flesh would melt. Thaw, resolve itself into a do is the rest of that phrase. And of course, I don't remember the whole soliloquy. But hey, I'm a huge Shakespeare fan. I was an English major. If that's a good one to read, if you've never read it. All right, let's go to the next track. This is going to be Another Day. This track is widely considered the most probable to have gone to radio and had success because it's kind of balladesque. And there was a formula in the 80s and early 90s for rock and metal records to have a slower, more balladesque tune that they could. It was usually the second track off a record that they would push. So interestingly, it's the second track literally on this album. And I had this conversation with a friend of mine, Morgan Wick, who's a great guitar player. You can check out his channel. We did a ranking of the tunes on this record as a part of the celebration. And this, one of the things I said is this track is kind of a through the lens of Dream Theater. It's rare that they actually do a straight up ballad the way, or power ballad the way that was formulaic in that time. It's just because that's just not who they are. But that said, this is we're gonna hear some sax in this. It's got some acoustic guitar. It's certainly delivered more intimately. But the theme of it is John's dad had gotten cancer, and I believe what I heard him say was, as they began to put this music down, the emotion of it touched him in the same way as how he was feeling about his dad. So this is part of the reason why I have a soft spot for this song. I've had friends who have had to battle cancer. John's dad lost his battle to cancer eventually, and John wrote the song "Take Away My Pain" off of "Falling into Infinity" that was honoring his dad, and it's a really cool tune. Maybe I'll do all the Dream Theater albums like this, and I'll get to that one. But this song is about John in some ways kind of speaking to his dad, encouraging him to keep fighting. So that sound, that breathy sound is, that's another really interesting vocal choice, I think, because most vocalists weren't doing that, certainly not in a rock or progressive metal band. So I think that there's some bravery there. Not bravery like going to war bravery, which is true bravery. But in terms of artistic bravery, which is its own thing, showing a vulnerability as a tool for expressing a lyric and in a way that it can't be delivered in some other ways. Something it's rare in music. I can't think of another vocalist off the top of my head who does this like James does. I'm sure there are. Please put them in the comments and remind me. Still, from the get-go, James does this. So like we start to see the tools in his vocal tool belt. And here's another one of them. It wasn't really present in the first track. Right from the beginning, there's some vulnerability that he's injecting into how he's going to deliver this lyric about John's dad. And I know I've seen James live. In fact, when they did Take Away My Pain in Seattle on that tour, fans were being fans, no shade on them, but, kind of catcalling and everything, getting into the night. And when they were preparing to play this song, James actually stopped the crowd and said, kind of calmed him down and said, "We're doing this next song about John's dad, and it's kind of serious in a way." And so he kind of wanted to set the mood, and it was a really cool moment. And everybody's like, "Oh yeah, okay," and calmed down into this song. That's the same kind of like thoughtfulness that James is approaching Another Day. So just a note about John's line there. We all know already from this album and from from their debut album, and certainly anybody listening back now after all these years, that John has all this technical facility. But he uses it when he needs to convey something. It's not gratuitous. I know that there are people who are not Dream Theater fans, and maybe even some who are, who kind of look at the band as, and a lot of the music as gratuitous. I don't quite understand that. Maybe it's because I'm a fan and I have a certain bias. But what I love about John's playing is when he needs to express something because of the nature of the song, he does all the gymnastics, and it's awesome. But he doesn't do it when he doesn't need to. And he's always on point with his melodic phrasing. That was an example in my mind.
Live another day, climb a little higher, find another reason to stay. Ashes in your hands, mercy in your eyes. If you're searching for a silent sky.
One of the things that sets this apart, if you want to call it balladesque, because of course there's the piano there's some of the kind of rudiments you hear, the dun 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 dun, that a lot of bands do when they do songs, balladesque songs with piano. And of course, Kevin is going to mix it up here and elsewhere on the record. But there's this sort of audio bed against which James is playing now. And the thing that I think that really sets it apart is when you listen to the lyrical treatment, it's not just the subject matter. It's like the word choice. And so if you're listening to this and, it's put out at radio as sort of the ballad, and it was, it's violating your expectations there in a good way. Now, I don't think the song was as successful at radio as it should have been. I'm a fan, so I admit my rose-colored glasses I'm looking through. But there's also this thing about when you treat subject matter in music that is kind of serious, it's not always successful. Sometimes what people want from their music is escape. They want thrill, and those are all legit. And Dream Theater does all of those things. But sometimes when a performer or artist will choose to lean in on some sort of theme or idea that isn't just sort of immediately fulfilling and requires a little emotional investment, it just doesn't do as well. I don't know the reason for that. There's a sociological conversation to have there. But I was always a little disappointed that this song didn't do better, not because it was a ballad, and ballads do great, but because I thought, we need songs like this that give us an emotional sort of spigot through which to, vent some of our own concern. Like, who hasn't had somebody in their life have cancer? At least as you grow older, that's just a thing. Most people do.
You won't find it here. Look another way.
I also love the lyric here because it's like this beautiful remonstration that John is giving of his dad. Like this, you won't find it here. Look another way. As though like his dad, is confronting this and, maybe succumbing to it mentally or emotionally. And John is remonstrating his dad lovingly, like, you're not going to find quarter for despairing thoughts with me. Look forward, like you can beat this. We'll beat this. That is the right hopeful attitude, I think, or at least that's the way I would have treated it. I know that there are other ways to react, and there's no right way to react. But it resonates with me because I think this is precisely how I would have responded.
You won't find it here. So die another day.
That's Jack Beckenstein or Stein. I always get that backwards. Soprano sax. I think it's cool. I think it gives it flavor. I know there's some fans not sure why there's horns on a Dream Theater record, but I disagree. I think it gives it a uniqueness, and the whole album is about uniqueness. So I think it's consistent.
You
Hear that? When he gets into words, it immediately transitions into this tone. It's one of the things I love about James.
The message in his silence, a face the candle to the wind. There's distance in my voice.
There was again. I know that I'm saying things you guys know, but I enjoy talking about it.
Isn't leaving you a choice? So if you're looking for a time to run away, you won't find it here. Looking at
By the way, Jay was or is, I should know this, but I don't, the owner of Bear Track Studios, where they tracked the album.
you won't find it here. So try another day.
Hear that little turn? That's hard to do, man, when you're up at that altitude. The other thing I'm going to say is this, and I think I may have said this elsewhere, so I apologize if this is redundant. I've heard vocalists cover this tune, even female vocalists who, because of the register of their voice, can get some of these notes with more ease. But even with those, as good as some of those covers are, they never have the tone James has. And I glory in the fact that we get James and we have this recording forever to hear him deliver this lyric this way. And it's about to go into a vocal bridge that is among my favorites in all Dream Theater music. Here we go.
They took pictures of our dreams when the heart behind us stands. That said maybe when it's right for you they'll fall. But if they don't come down, resist the next to pull them in and throw them away. To save the mystery, then surrender to the secret. Wow.
Isn't that amazing? And of course, there's some of that style, because he uses some of those vowels in his own way. And for that passage, which delivers on a lyric that is a little bit obtuse. Like it's not a perfect reflection, like if you try and go through it and understand it. But I talked to John about this, and part of what he said was he was trying to capture a feeling, this like youthful feeling. So they took pictures of our dreams, ran to hide behind the stairs, and said, maybe when it's right for you, they'll fall. He's trying to capture this sort of vigor of youthfulness and this hope. And it feels like it's this this desire, this claim that he wants his dad to make on life, and it's moving. I mean, I get a little choked up thinking about it. And the fact that James leaned in to deliver this lyric with the kind of power and resonance that he did, I think man, if there was any doubt before that bridge of his rightfulness in this band, all of that was gone second he delivered that vocal. Okay, so what can you say? The solo that John delivers there is kind of in keeping, not just because it's in the right key and all that. It has the emotional tenor that it needs to have for this song, and it displays John's melodic sensibility as well as his technical sensibility. I love how James can release out of those big notes, and just kind of soften. He does it all over the Dream Theater catalog. It's a really cool technique. Not always easy when you're driving so much compression into the vocal. I think it's a next level technique, and I'm not saying other vocalists can't do it. There are obviously some that do, but James does it effortlessly. Makes it sound so great, and it kind of it wanes into this little bit of rasp, which can be natural, but also appropriate for this song, right? So good. All right, let's just keep moving along. Take the time. This was part of the demo, the 3-song demo, I think, that got them their 8 album contract with Atco. I think trying to remember the other two. It'll come to me. But this song, was part of the demonstration of who Dream Theater is that helped them earn their record contract. Now I'm going to comment here, kind of get it over with. There is a triggered snare sound. I think there was on other parts of the kit. And Portnoy hated it, but the producer, Prater, I think the guy's name, David Prater, kind of, I guess, insisted. It's the same sound was used on a Firehouse record of the same era. For me, it's part of the listening experience now, so I don't have any problems with it. But I know Portnoy didn't necessarily care for it, and some fans have commented on it. But for me, it's part of, I guess it's a nostalgic part of listening to the record. So I don't even hear it, as a thing. Kevin, more magic. Okay, so we're about to go into these samples that come in. I'll just give them to you if you don't know them. There is from Curtis Blow's Christmas Rappin', Hold It Now, from Frank Zappa's Dancin' Fool, Wait a Minute, and then from Public Enemy's Power to the People, Come On, before James will come in with what I think is the first time I ever heard something I would call metal rap.
Wait a minute. Come on.
Just let me catch my breath. I've heard the promises, I've seen the mistakes. I've had my fair share of shipwrecks. Need a new voice, new love, new way.
The bass in there, just like kind of funky, just making the movement happen. That's My Young Magic.
Time reevaluate. It's time to pick out the pieces, go back to
John too. John Petrucci too.
square one. I think it's time for a change.
Now, folks know, I think, and if you don't, I'll just say it now. This is a song where they did. I think the only time they've done it, they divided up lyrical responsibilities. Before James, each member took a verse or section and wrote the lyrics. I did this thing when I was talking to John. I had written out who I think wrote what, and I haven't found this on the internet. It probably exists, and I just didn't find it. But I think that I know who wrote which parts. And I was right with John. I was Petrucci, just because I have a good sense of his word choices and how he conveys a lyric. I think the very first one is Portnoy. And then I'll give you the rest in a minute. Those are my guesses. If I get them wrong, put it in the comments. This is where I think Portnoy wrote lyrics. Could be more.
Decisions are fashion. I won't waste another breath. You can feel the waves coming on. It's time to take the time. Let that story will carry you on. It's time to take the time. You're fighting the weight of the world, and no one can save you this time. Close your eyes, you can find all you need in your mind.
So that's probably, in my mind, on the record, the most sort of commercial sounding chorus, which isn't a bad thing. But that's how kind of it feels to me.
Unbroken spirit of
This is John Petrucci, and I knew this. I could tell by the lyrics. It's also like with the instrumentation beneath it, the sort of rhythmic movement, and how James delivers this. This is my favorite section of this particular track.
good in this quiet, my spirit is this trial demands. And at the end of this day, it's such an anxious relief. But the fortune lies still in his hands. If there's a concept there, wasted yet, man must let it go. If there's obsession, trail, suppression that he feels, must stand the hell. Life is no more assuring than love.
He also, I missed a lyric there myself. He also, like the ascent there is crazy awesome. Like he just kind of moves up in that last part, and he's, just kind of floating up there. I think that I've said this before, I think we lose sight of, or don't understand, what James is pulling off and making it seem like it's nothing. This is one of my favorite breakdown sections on the record. And there is a quote. I'll just give it to you now. I'll probably mispronounce it because I don't know foreign languages. I'm not good at them. I've taken 2. I took Latin in college. I took Spanish in high school. I can't remember any of it. My brain's just not wired that way. But there's a section I can see much clearer now I'm blind. And then there is from Cinema Paradiso, is a 1988 film. It's about a kid who kind of develops this deeper friendship with the projectionist at local theater. And he says, Ora che ho perso la vista si ci vedo di più. Someone's going to totally correct me. But that translates roughly to, now that I lost vision, I can see more. So that's why they've sampled this in, is because it's precisely the lyric that they've given, just with a different phrasing.
Feel the water rise around me. Drown the beat of time. Let my
I think this is my young. That's my guess.
senses fall away. I can see much clearer now. I'm blind.
Ora che ho perso la vista.
There it is.
vedo di più.
This same theme about seeing without eyesight is also repeated in Surrounded when we get there. It's a cool concept. It's this idea that, what you see is not what you see. And at any rate, what you're able to understand with your mind is a far more important sensibility than visual information. Which is an interesting concept when you think about the projectionist, right? The projectionist is the one who says this. and his job is to project movies, which are a visual medium. So I love that kind of playfulness with the theme and the language, images and words. Hear how it there's all of this sort of movement, and now all of this, and in this section, it starts to feel hopeful. The music starts to move into this hopeful, like, mood. More building, more building. Oh, the dual solo is so great. I've got it in each instrument in each ear. This was part of the revelation for me with Dream Theater. They weren't the first to do it, but they did it so well, where the key, Moore and Petrucci, keys and guitar, are doing a double, and they're so synchronized, and the sounds are so complementary. And it's tricky because they're not just playing a simple line. And so, seeing them do this live, let alone on the record, was part of the revelation for me. Like, just another level, another tool that the band was demonstrating from this get-go. When I say get-go, I mean the sophomore effort, the era that began with LaBrie and continues. Funk. I mean, the only other band doing anything funky was Extreme, right? At least with any degree of popularity. Correct me if I'm wrong, put it in the comments, but... and this is the kind of thing that Dream Theater does. They include styles. Jordan later introduces some ragtime, which I think is so cool, so playful. Some fans don't like that. I dig it. Playful, my young. Here comes the keyboard solo. Man can spin a phrase, can't he? Oh my gosh. So good. I love these instrumental sections. Like Dream Theater was the first band that I took a lot of notice that they would write a part where there would be a bespoke solo, but they would write instrumental parts where the bands are catching figures together, and that was part of the composition. It is part of what elongates the tunes, but if you like the arrangement and compositional style, then you're happy to stipulate to the fact that the song's going to be longer, because you're never going to get it on the radio anyway. It's not 3 minutes. I mean, there was a radio edit, but I think the radio edit was still 5 minutes. And the whole song is about, they had this challenge. I think it was about a 3-year period between the first record and this record, Images and Words, where there was management changes and vocal turnover and trying to find a record label. And so the theme of it is take the time to get it right, essentially, right? You don't rush it. I think they knew that they had something that could be special. And they didn't compromise. They had a vision for it. They stuck to it. It was hard. 3 years in music life career is a long time to not feel like you're making progress. So, I mean, from that standpoint, really appreciate what they're trying to communicate with this song. And of course, we can abstract it to our own lives, taking time to, in our own lives to get things right. That's the value of music. There's that turn again, right at the top, that big note, so effortlessly done, and yet that's a second level technique. Right down into this soft part, James and his lushness. Kind of a coda. This is kind of a coda. This gets slaughtered in the radio edit, this part. This is why I listen to music, though. I don't listen to it so that I can hear the 3 minutes of gratification on the radio. I don't listen to it for a song that is so lyrically stunted that once I've heard like 3 seconds, I know every other word in the whole thing. I listen to it because I want to have this journey. Now, the trade-off that Dream Theater has made is, this record was their best-selling, certified gold. Pull Me Under was their biggest single ever because of the rotation it saw at radio and in video, and hit number 10. And they've never sold another album quite as well. They haven't had things on the radio. So the trade-off they've made to stay sort of consistent with their vision and their art was that they weren't going to get as probably, that's not never. And of course, they just won the Grammy for The Alien from A View from the Top of the World. So there's some recognition there for sure, at least from the industry. But in terms of sales, like they don't play Wembley. Well, maybe they have played Wembley. But when they tour, they usually toured like mid-sized theaters. I think they sell out better in Europe than they do in America. But they're not, selling to 50,000 stadiums like they should, in my view, because they've made this decision about the music that they want to make and this music that is going to care about the composition. And this part reminds me of that because they go back down the dynamics, really soft, lush, bare instrumentally, and they're going to build again towards the end. Effectively, you could say you could have cut the song off there and saved yourself a couple of minutes. The fact that Dream Theater doesn't is part of the reason I listen to them. And I do listen to bands that do shorter stuff, and I love jazz music. I love a lot of classical music. Had that conversation with Michael Romeo recently. But don't, if you something you're trying to express and you wait to express it, and you have the facility the way Dream Theater does, I'm happy to give you all that time to do it. So good. Outro solo. Don't hear that much in a lot of rock and metal. The other thing I love about John's playing, there's a lot of, I won't name names because, again, I don't want to create controversy, but there are a lot of guitar players who are fast and there are musical figures or arpeggios that they'll use in a solo. They don't always match perfectly with the phrasing, like to end in a place that makes sense for the phrasing of the rhythm that they're playing over. John, on the other hand, he finds a way when he's using various scales or arpeggios or figures to play them in a way that always are phrased articulately against the rest of the instrumentation. And so like I'll listen, and I'm not going to name names, but I'll listen to even guitarists that I love a lot. And I love it. I love it for the imperfection. So I guess that's true. But it'll end in kind of a place that's doesn't make a lot of sense. Because of that, the phrasing never feels as thoughtfully considered. John never does that. John's always, even if the phrase is going to move across a break in time signature or something like that, how he decides to articulate it with a run or holding on something or bending, all of that stuff is part of how he delivers on phrasing that always feels so beautifully written. And I know I was talking to Jordan about the forthcoming album before it came out, and he believes the same thing about John and how he writes solos, and so he had put some extra care into his solos for A View from the Top of the World with that idea in mind. So I wanted to take a moment to say that is John has the speed, but he doesn't just have a figure and he plays it and then it lands as close as it does and then we move on. His solos always feel written, but poignantly so, meaning they're appropriate for the song. It's one of the reasons I think that he is so often listed and credited by guitar magazines. It's not just the speed; it's the composition. Okay, that was Take the Time. Let's move on to Surrounded. I love this song. Oh my gosh.
Morning comes too early, and nighttime falls too late.
This is Kevin Moore. And right there with John across all Dream Theater lyricists, I placed him, even though his tenure with the band was very short. He had a certain gift and knack for lyric writing. Sometimes with a little bit of abstractness, like this tune, sometimes not at all, with like, I think it's 6 a.m. Like that lyric he writes, I want to talk about lifelong mistakes, and you can tell your stepfather I said so. It's like, wow. Like there's a rawness to that it goes great with the tune too. But there's something about how he finds words to convey some sort of meaning that is just really unique. And this song's a good example.
Sometimes all I want to do is wait. The shadow I've been hiding in has fled from me today. I know it's easier to walk away than look it in the eye.
See, that lyric gave me chills. And the reason it does is because, and I've read some studies on this, some sociological studies, but since the 60s, particularly in Western society, the challenge of relationships, the challenge of commitment, not just to like a marital relationship, but even to a religious relationship or a community relationship, which are fraught with like the error of being human and the messiness of life. There's this sensibility that's grown that, hey, if it's hard, I even heard Oprah say this once, like if it's, if it feels hard, if it's sometimes not feeling good, then get out. And it's like, man, that's not what relationships are. Like after that romance period, real relationships are working through the challenge. There's not, I don't know, any relationship of any kind that where there isn't disagreement, because people are different. It doesn't matter how many fundamental things you agree on. I know I'm soapboxing now. I'm sorry. But I think that this is part of the power and strength of Kevin Moore's lyrics, is that he can look at these rather nakedly and deliver a lyric on it that just resonates. Like it just gave me chills, because he says, I know it's easier to walk away than look it in the eye. That's exactly right. And he's going to get into this. It's one of the reasons I think this is like one of the buried tracks. There's only 8 tracks, and I know fans of the record like this track, but I think it's not as talked about as I would like for it to be talked about. So I'm talking about it.
But I will raise a shelter to the sky, and here beneath the stars alive, she will slowly yield the light as I awaken from the longest night.
So there's this whole theme about moving into the light, not having a shadow to hide in anymore. And so we're about to get into this, but I think there's some imagery here that's abstract enough for us to apply individually, while still having a through line, a kind of consistent meaning as we apply it. Now, I could be getting way too high-minded about this. Like, Kevin might come back and say, oh man, that was about my lawnmower, had nothing to, but I think having looked as much as I have at his music, not just the Dream Theater stuff, I have a sense that he's pretty considered in how he treats things lyrically. The other thing I'll say here, not about this part, it kind of just occurs to me. Dream Theater plays with time, right? Time signatures. One of the beauty of how they do it, and Rush does this to a degree. Although I heard Geddy Lee say one time that sometimes, in the interest of being progressive, they'd write a phrase that was in sort of standard time, and then they'd add a beat just to kind of throw it off. Now, they always made it musical because those guys are consummate musicians. But Dream Theater, in the same way, when there are passages that are in different time, and they love to do this, they never feel that way to me. Now, maybe I'm different in this regard, but I don't think so. I think others who listen to the music who may not even be as aware that this is a thing that Dream Theater thinks about, and that they write in on odd time signatures. But the way that Portnoy is able to communicate the rhythm, and the way that John and Kevin in this record deliver against that rhythm, never make it feel herky jerky. That's the technical term. This sort of stilted, undanceable. Like they joke about that, but it never feels that way. It always feels musically as though it's moving rightfully from one section to the next. That's a testament to their musicianship. There's also this idea in the lyrics of he's about to say dreams are shake and set sirens, waking up tired eyes, something like that. There's also this idea of awakening, right? And dawn comes. There's light. We're moving out of slumber. We're moving away from stasis. I think that's part of it.
Dreams will shake and set sirens, waking up tired eyes. With the light of memories all rushing to his head. By a candle stands a mirror of his heart and soul. She dances. She was dancing through the night above his bed. And walking to the window, he throws the shutters out against the wall.
think you could regard this as very metaphorical. I certainly know, and I was even in progressive bands who, like the band I talked about at the front end of this particular video, sometimes in the interest of trying to sound really intelligent and deep, would write lyrics with big multisyllabic words that didn't really make a lot of sense. Someone might listen to that last passage and think, oh, that's super abstract. What the heck does that mean? That may be the case. Maybe Kevin was just working through some imagery, but I don't think so. I think that he's giving us an archetype, some sort of focal point against which to kind of move into awareness, a state of mindfulness. I don't like to sound too new agey, but there's something about that with the way that sunlight brings things to our remembrance, to our awareness, our understanding, and is also protective. Like that understanding creates a protection for us. It's always better to be informed than uninformed, right? In the dark, so to speak, as this character in this particular song moves out of his shadow at the very beginning. Musically, the whole thing has this hopeful undercarriage, at least for me. It's remarkable.
It's been a long, long time. He's had a while to think it over. In the end, he only sees the change. Light to dark, dark to light, light to dark, dark to light.
Okay, so a couple of things there. Like, what a cool, unique lyrical phrase. And he just says it front and back, front and back, front and back. Dark to light, light to dark. But also, he's had a long, long time. He's had a while to think it over. There's something kind of plaguing this character that he's thinking through. And across the time with which it's in his head, he's just observing the change of days. And now he's about to get to, I think, the epiphany that comes from that.
Heaven must be more than this, with angels wink and replicate.
Okay, so the beauty of the convergence here is James is about to get into these resonant full notes that I've talked about. At the same time that the lyric is beginning to deliver on the epiphany. Heaven must be more than this, when angels waken with a kiss. Sacred hearts won't take the blame, but mine will never be the same. So the character, the I in this song is awakening, right? He's coming to an understanding.
Sacred hearts won't take the pain, but mine will never be the same.
So Sacred Hearts won't take the pain. I don't know what Sacred Hearts are. I mean, there is the heart that's on the front of the cover, and I'll talk about the cover here in a minute. But that could be a stab at there are some folks who are really protective with their ideology of their values and their relationships. And he's sort of opening himself up. His understanding is, mine will never be the same. My heart will never be the same, as a consequence of these memories that have returned to him. I don't want to get too deep in the lyrics because this is all super subjective. I guess my point in sharing or thinking out loud about it is it's evocative, and Kevin's lyrics do this for me.
He stands before the window. He shares slowly fading from the way.
What a cool, just floats up there and in and out, James.
Every time I hear her call, let the lights surround you.
So there's this second character, this that she's calling to him, let the light surround you. I don't want to go into that. There's some very, very, it could be memory. It could be someone who's passed away. It could be an angel. Like there's a lot of others that could be. But in any case, the invitation is cool, right? Let light surround you, understanding, awareness. And for some, something more reverential, for sure. Cool that Petrucci's like doing this figure. He's not just wailing not that he ever does, but it's not a run. It's like these musical figures, because that's what's right for the part.
Once lost, but I was found.
That whole theme about being lost and found, there's certainly at least some spiritual references there, or can be.
When I heard that statement said all around me,
Where do we find stained glass?
I sent those bags tumbling down the hill. But I will hold this what I have.
Oh man, he just kind of just lifts up and hits those notes.
Me still. She whispers words to clear my mind. I once could see, but now I'm blind.
There's that hearkening back to the idea before about being able to see once you're blind. And he's got this figure in this that's who's helping him hearken to this, right? Whoever we want to decide that is for us personally.
I know it's easier to walk away than look it in the eye. But I had given all that I could take.
That gave me chills too. We all feel like that, man. I'm sorry, I'm kind of going deeper on the lyrics on this one. It's just this one does that to me. But we all feel like that sometimes. We've given our all. There's just nothing left in the tank.
And now I've only habits left to break. Tonight I'll still be lying here surrounded in all the light.
Oh, lots of chills there. I don't know. Dream Theater music does that to me. A lot of music does that to me, but theirs certainly does. But that idea, like he woke up, he had memories rush in, he had this sort of awakening, he's just surrounded by the light, and at the end, he's done all he can do, but it's okay, because even as he goes back to bed, or however he's sort of getting back into sort of just a calm state, he's in a darkened state in terms of maybe just even just the light source, but he's surrounded internally, because it's more about his mind, not what he's seeing. It's just such a cool song lyrically. Okay, let's move on. Sorry to go so deep on that one. You can fast forward if you're bored. Interestingly, this song is not polarizing, but it's some place at first among equals. Others have it last among equals, because they usually like everything on the album. Maybe because they've heard it a lot or something. For me, it sits pretty much at the top. I think that sometimes we have an instinct to deposition a song because we've heard it so much and it kind of loses its luster. When I looked back at this tried to have it with fresh eyes, with a objective perspective, I was kind of floored again at like how much Dream Theater is in this song, like this mythic opening that they have, how it builds. Well, I'll talk about it as we go through it, but I think it sits as sort of a quintessential Dream Theater tune in representing all of the things that they do so well. I think I heard John talking about this and saying that they weren't there for the mix, and Prater did. I think that's his name. But the producer did some of this extended sort of build stuff at the beginning. For me, it's part of the track now. I love the various ticks and tacks that help us kind of get to the opening with the crunchy guitar. I think it's part of the build. Well, it is the build. I mean, they're creating a narrative sensibility for this song. Now, when we get into the lyrics, it is more abstract for sure. And John says as much. It's story-like though. It's archetypal, I think, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I mean, you definitely get this feeling that you're going on a journey. At least I do. I think that's part of how John probably arrived at some of the lyrical sensibilities that he uses. I'm going to say it just right up front. James is already starting in a place, pitch-wise, like at the outset, that sets sort of this, that means that the ceiling for this, if he's going to get into it, and he does, is going to be stratospheric. And he's going to hold it, and we'll talk about it. I've wondered at times if one of the advantages James has in his sort of vowel pronunciations is because he's Canadian. Huh? I love listening to the kick drum and the bass like locked together. So the dynamic drops. James gets low and lush.
I was told there's a new love that's born through each one that has died. I was told there'll be no one to call on when I feel alone and afraid. I was told if you dream of the next world, you'll find yourself swimming in a lake of light.
Yeah. So all of the lushness starting to build, and then literally a scale that goes from down there up into that tone he gets and sets the new floor for what he's about to do vocally. Obviously the instrumentation is building the bed for him to do that. This really is, in my mind though, a showcase for James.
As a child, I thought I could live without pain, without sorrow. As a man, I found it so caught up with me. I must forget I'm so afraid.
And then he holds that just like it's nothing. Now, I don't know that he's done that every time he's sung it live, nor would I expect him to. because live you're moving around and you don't get any sleep and you're eating like garbage and all of the other things that affect a biological instrument, like the voice, in a way it doesn't quite affect other players. I'm not suggesting that it's that others don't have it hard or that James is better because of this, but it's indisputable that the effects on the voice are unique and challenging. And but to do this at all, ever, is remarkable. And I think that the effortlessness with which James delivers all of that altitude in terms of pitch and power, and then to hold that note, even in the studio, is a big deal. I've been doing a lot of vocalizing lately to this record, partly for fun, partly as a, I self-teach as I kind of work through it. And I can tell you, man, that's really, really hard to do. There's just not a lot of guys who can pull that off. And meanwhile, of course, there's this story being told, and the character, which is sometimes represented as a young girl, there's the three dances. There's the dance of death, the dance of deceit, and then the dance of love. Kind of representing the major experiences of life in this sort of journey to the best, most optimistic place, which is love. But that in order to get there, you go through severe trial. You go through death, which is a big deal. Betrayal, in some ways, is another kind of death. For some, worse, than simply ceasing to exist. So I really like John's choices archetypally to depict this kind of mortal journey, this getting to this ideal place, this ideal of love. Now, there are some speculations that the story is about Romulus and Remus, the two brothers that founded Rome. The song at one time was called Crumbling Metropolis, so I don't know if that's right. It's interesting conjecture. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that wasn't. I asked John. That wasn't what he was thinking, but it's fun to look through our own lens at the lyrics. That's what I've been doing here. But I think it's a little bit more abstract than that. And the Miracle and the Sleeper are kind of maybe the two characters that are here, sort of talking to each other. But they've, I think John deliberately left it abstract enough for us to, be able to interpret it our own way. And that's part of it. And because it has this feeling of sort of epic storytelling, the epic journey, we all kind of resonate with it. I think it's why a lot of fans hear the lyrics and they kind of intuit a meaning without maybe having a definitive meaning, if that makes sense. This is the instrumental section that I think kind of put Dream Theater on the map. I mean, they had the Yitzy Jam from before. They certainly done other things. But in the context of this record, Images and Words, for all of the other sort of great performances, this section really just we've just listened to James do vocal acrobatics, stuff that's rarefied air in terms of vocal ability. Now it's our turn, so to speak. And there's this blend. There's blends of more traditional sections inside this longer instrumental section that are solos. And then there's parts that are, I usually call them catching the same figures, where the bands are kind of doing things in concert, but it's less about an individual player doing something against the rest of them and them doing everything together. And there's both inside this couple of minutes of music. John Mayong tickling the bass strings. There's the dual solos, man. Those little different sounds make me happy. This is kind of progressive rock metal at its pinnacle, right? Or at least at its sort of its perception by other folks. They hear this, oh well, you know, and for some, this immediately disqualifies it as something they want to pay attention to, because they, you know, just don't have the patience or want to try and make sense of and listen through and hear the journey of these various parts and how they're going to piece together, and the different pairings of instruments in order to give different flavors across this few minutes of music. And that's fine. But this the opposite side of that coin is that for progressive fans, and certainly a lot of musicians, they love this because they see the musicians kind of using their abilities to deliver this performance, and it's just fun and impressive. Also, like a good chance for James to go and get a drink and relax for a minute. You can feel the ascent here, right? I mean, you can kind of feel that it's coming to a close. That all felt for me like really triumphant without being saccharine. Resetting of the sort of mythical sense, the journey that we're about to come into for the final stage, which is this last dance. So leaves fallen, lock the doors. There's this sort of closing off, this ending. Before those things, we're going to get to this dance of love.
There must be the third and last dance. This one will last forever.
That's the promise of it, right? Is that these other things, death, deceit, scary as they are, they're kind of finite. Like, I know that sounds weird. Death is final, right? Of the body. And of course that makes me think of Spirit Carries On, which is the big song in the Scenes from a Memory, which is the part 2 of Metropolis. But that said, these are finite ideas. They're things that you experience for a season. But love, that's eternal. Well, at least that's our conception of it, that it goes on. It's a beautiful ideal, and it as an archetype makes perfect sense that this is the third and last dance.
Metropolis watches and thoughtfully smiles. She's taking you to your home.
So Metropolis is kind of anthropomorphized there a little bit, or at least given sort of sentience. The character moving through Metropolis sees that its denizen come to this understanding, come to love. And so the city smiles on that. Like, civilization sees that better, bigger, more enduring than it is human love. Love it.
It can only take place when the struggle between our children has ended.
Happens when we get past conflict. So, and that's a human thing that happens in spades in tight quarters in a thing like a metropolis. But when you put that aside, and you get to something where you can see and regard somebody more purposefully, more appropriately, it's a loving regard, and that's what the mirror, I think, the sleeper has arrived at. By the way, arriving after that ascent and coming into this last section of the song, vocal section, and then getting to those notes and hitting that, having that vibrato on those high notes and doing it twice, also really hard. And James makes it sound like, oh, well, that's my Tuesday. So there's hope again, right? Hope triumphing in the face of all the other bad stuff, and hope in this case being love. These are really, they're grand themes, and they're treated with this kind of uniqueness, these storytelling qualities, and certainly this amazing musicianship. It's the convergence of all of this stuff that make this record such a touchstone, at least for me, and I know for a lot of other people. It's firing on all pistons. My argument that I make in my conversation with John and James, I think it's still happening. I think in different flavors, in different areas of their career, it's continued to be the case. Like, there's this bar they set with this record that they've maintained. We can debate if every song or every album's where it sits relative to this effort. But their energy and their commitment to their craft and to doing all the things lyrically, musically, thematically, vocally, and all the other instruments remains at this altitude of commitment to their craft and to their career that it's just special. It's unique in the world of music. And I think this is why, even though they may not have the legions of fans that other bands do, those fans are not transient. And I've seen it in forums where someone finally has heard Dream Theater in recent years and they're like, how was I sleeping on this band for so long? This is if there's a tragedy, the tragedy is that the communication and distribution vehicles that are supposed to bring us like music that is thrilling as well as edifying have done a disservice to Dream Theater in not getting their music more listeners, because it would not only make them happy, arguably, I think it could, make them better people. That sounds really high-minded. I mean, music isn't just about like self-improvement. That's, it can be about that. But this music, and I guess what I'm trying to express is that it changed my life. Like this album changed my life. And I think it changed a lot of other lives. And I think that it, writ large, Dream Theater music has that capacity for a lot of people. And so there's a little sadness in me that there's not more people who are aware of Dream Theater. This video is probably going to be mostly seen by Dream Theater fans, but if there's one person that sees this and watches it, I'm hoping anything I say might communicate to you that there's something special about this and give it a little bit more of your time. And I think you'll become a fan. I think you'll start to see some of the things that many of us do. Okay, there's the epic. Let's go on to Under a Glass Moon. Real quick before I do this, I want to talk a little bit about the cover. I didn't know all this, but I did a little bit of reading and research so that I could talk about it. So the artwork, it was created by Larry Fremantle. And initially, Larry did a lot of conversation with John, both the Johns, others later too, but I guess principally it began with them. They wanted the girl. I think the girl's an embodiment of hope, innocence, but mostly hope, because children usually don't see through eyes that see, the stain of humanity and of error and duplicity. There's the bird that's flying in that they wanted, the style of room that they wanted. It's kind of this collage, and you can see it there on the screen. Of engravings and illustrations. It's kind of before a lot of the more advanced Photoshop things we have now. So it has its own sort of unique feel. And I think Dream Theater in many ways tried to continue on with that sort of collage feeling in their album covers. But if you look at it, you can see the sky and you start to see like some of the imagery from various lyrics there. Clouds roll by and I roll with them. There's the miracle in the sleeper, like she's existing in this room where, maybe it's her room where she sleeps. So you kind of, if you walk through the image, you start there. The symbol, the Dream Theater logo, is there in the canopy. Anyway, I don't know that they're all represented, but it's kind of a fun exercise to see the Easter eggs that exist in the cover that have reference to the album. And then Fremantle hired John Stevens, a calligrapher, to do a personal font type. I don't think this font type exists before this record, and I think it's become a mainstay for Dream Theater. I guess there's an outfit called Hypnosis, Hipgnosis, that's done a lot of album artwork like this, if I'm having that right. And they were fans of it. So that's a little bit of backstory on the cover if you are interested. By the way, the album was supposed to be a double album originally. Natco, I guess, killed that. It was going to have Change of Seasons was part of it. Like, imagine that record. I love Change of Seasons. If this double album had that, there's some other songs I'll remember here in a bit that were also going to be part of that, but that were cut. To Live Forever. That was one of the other ones. I think that was one of the songs that was on the demo that got them the record deal and was going to be on Images and Words, but was cut. I guess the Prater really wanted to keep the album under an hour. Probably by the time this is out, if not, I guess I reveal it here. I'm doing a cover of Under a Glass Moon with some of my bandmates from Symphony North, which is my band, and then a keyboard player I know that's not part of Symphony North. I will say now and will say then, I'm not James LaBrie, so I don't think anybody can do that song justice, but it's one of my favorite tracks, this one here, Under a Glass Moon. So we're doing it. We're going to put it out. I'll tell you a little bit real quick. I just got some new signal chain stuff, and I had to turn over some of my gear. So I'm compressing what should have been more vocal time to, produce my effort on it than I would like. I'm having to do it very, very quickly. But it's not about how great I can sing this song, because if you want greatness, you're going to listen to James do it. It's more about me expressing how much I love this album, how important the album was for me to do a cover. And any of them would have been an honor to even put my voice on as an homage. But this is the one we chose. I just love the rhythmic stuff here. Portnoy is awesome. I see how the band's doing that whole thing. Just love when they're all doing that together. It's so powerful. And then this verse rhythm, that's like, it would be a challenge for a lot of musicians to find a way to play something over this. Like the instinct would be to write something that was more vocally rhythmic. Like one of the things I think about, like with David Draymond, like he's built a career on doing that. And I like Disturbed. But a lot of the intent is for the vocals to kind of follow those. Here you've got this really, really distinct rhythm against which it would be hard to really do something like that. And I think the instinct would be to try and figure out how to accentuate it. Instead, they create this sort of lofting, I don't know if that's a word, this lilting, really cool melodic line that actually starts at kind of a higher level, as James does a lot on this record. Hear that? Always gets into that tone. See there, instead of singing the restrictive E, he opens it. We know what he's singing, but it sounds cool, right? And I have a friend, he's a writer friend, because I also write books. And we do panels sometimes at Comic-Con and places like that. And one of the things he said one time's always stuck with me. He says, the rule of cool always wins. And in art, there's, it may not be a hard and fast rule, but it's certainly something to think about. Cool, you always want cool. See how he goes from that, like that. He's got a lot of compression to hit these big notes, these higher pitches, and then he drops right down into this lushness that he's become sort of noted for, a signature of his. And he does that. He just passes up and down that with such facility. I think it's remarkable. And now that's flashlights scan my dreams. Liquid shadows silence their screams. I gotta tell you, doing some tracking on this, and I am out of vocal shape. I had COVID, and so I've been down for a while. But the ease, like it was, I've been going over this section that James does this and hits it with the power, the ease, just dialed up my regard for the man that much more above what it already was. Like if you're a musician, or even if you're not a musician, if you want to give yourself a heightened sense of what you're hearing and what these guys are doing, try doing it. Like really doing it, like, and record yourself doing it and then listen back and you're like, oh, I mean, really, you're like, oh. All those bright, full notes. It's glorious. Isn't that cool? Time! Just kills it. See, they changed it up. This verse is different than the last one, instrumentally. I love that. Like you go underneath, and even though there's some parts that return, it's very often more through composed. I mean, maybe that's not as true, but the variance, I guess, is what I'm trying to underscore, is that these guys, it's why, like, gosh, in their catalog, when they got to go out on the road, they got to like go back into their catalog and probably spend some time refreshing, because there's so much music. And it's not like it's ABC and we're out. It's they're using a lot of letters. See, so John's, John Petrucci there is doing something a little bit more dreamy, and then under it, Portnoy's just like driving this forward, giving it all of this motion. The mix is really, really. I don't mean the mix of the album. I mean the mix of musical ideas that are working together to deliver this particular verse is really, really cool. I think it's an advanced compositional technique, and these guys are so good at it. Hear that? That yours just soars, man. So good. Tell you, that little turn right there at that pitch, especially after you've been in the studio a little while, forget it, man. I mean, not that it's undoable, but to do it with that much control and that much resonance, I can count on one hand the number of vocalists I would even give that opportunity to try. I mean, I know that it sounds like I'm fanboying a lot on the whole record, the album, the band, or this particular song and James. And that's true, of course, to a degree, but I think it's all warranted. And it's the reason I'm doing this video in the first place, is I think that while I would make a case for a lot of the Dream Theater records, this one in particular, because it set that sound and it set the stage for such a career of musicianship and music, I wanted to document it. That's all. So, if you're still with me, I'm doing this for me a little bit. And I think fans will understand why because no one who hasn't heard Dream Theater is still with me at this point on this video. So a lot of people would hear this part and think, oh, that's pretty herky-jerky. Certainly not danceable. Or at least if you're dancing to it, you're an advanced dancer. I just love the polyrhythms, and they make sense. Like at least for me, like they fall together in the right places. The accents are in the right places. The counterpoints are cool. Dream Theater good at this. A lot of bands I've heard. I won't use names again, but I've heard some bands recently do a lot of polyrhythm stuff, and I know these guys are masterful at their craft, at their instrument, and they know what they're doing, and the things make sense on paper. But when I hear them, they don't land. I think it's part of the reason that Dream Theater's continued to have success. I'm not a guitar player, but I've been told by many this is pretty widely regarded in Dream Theater circles as one of John's best solos. And I don't think that necessarily means most complicated, although I'm sure that it's got a level of complexity. But I think it's the musicality, the complexity, the appropriateness for the song, all that, the choices that he makes with tone. And mad runs like that. He's also got to work across some of the changing rhythmic stuff underneath. I don't know if it's this tune. I think it might be this tune that John talked about. Like he had to work through it in order to arrive at a solo that made sense and cohered with respect to what was going on beneath, which was so varied. There's not a lot of guitarists who could have done this with the same sort of, and pull it off the way John has. I heard Jordan once say it's his feeling, and of course he's got a bias, but that he believes that John will be regarded as one of the greatest guitarists of his generation. I would echo that 100%. And there's a lot of great guitar players, a lot of them. But it's not simply about your technique, or any of that. It has everything to do with how that's applied. And that's where I think John is particularly gifted. Sorry. I mean, listen to what's going on underneath it with the bass and the drums. You're like, I got to solo to that, and it's got to be cool, and it's got to move, and it's got to make sense. Keyboard. Dude's just a phenom. I'm going to just say it one last time on this tune. It's hard, I think, if you're not a vocalist, and maybe even if you haven't tried that, to do it. And I'm guessing that there's people who will hear this who can achieve the notes. But I would love to hear someone achieve it with the same resonance and the same effortlessness, and arrive at the same tone. Though, I mean, it's all of those things that give it the sort of life and have given it the sort of longevity as a track and as an album that it has. And it's all of them. It's everybody. But I'm right there in particular referencing James's concluding vocal passage. So I heard John talking. He wrote the lyrics to that. He was sitting in front of his house in his car. It was raining. It was at night. There was a moon out. So he got some of the imagery directly from, personal life there. So John is an amazing lyricist, I think. He's talked to me about the fact that he likes the idea of writing and telling stories. And it's why he puts care into his lyrics. And I think he's very, very good at it. Not just because of all the other, I think, glowing things I've said about John, but he's good at it. I think he's very good at it. Okay, Wait for Sleep. So I looked this up because I was having trouble counting it, and I found some sheet music. I can't vouch for whether the sheet music is right or not, but it said this first part's 5/8, 4/8, 6/8. I'm sure it can be counted different ways, but this is Kevin Moore, all Kevin Moore and James. Kevin in the lyrics are quintessentially Kevin Moore because James's first name is Kevin.
Standing by the window, eyes upon the moon.
It just occurred to me that Kevin, in a couple of places, has used this imagery of the window. Walk into the window, he throws shutters out against the wall. Here he's standing at the window, eyes upon the moon. Interestingly, the moon imagery from the last track and this whole Wait for Sleep track is a prelude to the next track. There's this continuity inside their music. And I think this is thoughtful. I know Portnoy cared a lot about the progression of songs, both on the albums as well as live. So it won't be a surprise to me if it's documented somewhere that this was all orchestrated in order to give an album effect. It's one of the great things that's lost in the digital streaming age is the whole experience of an album linearly, because bands like Dream Theater care about that, and they think about it as the experience you have if you listen to it that way. I encourage everybody to do that with Dream Theater because it is something they think about.
Memory will leave a spirit soon. She shuts the doors and lights and lays a body on the bed where images and words are running deep.
Okay, so there's the lyric that gives the album its title. And this is another song that has to do, there was some discussion online or some documentation that Kevin was talking about a friend that was dealing with mortal loss. And there's a little bit of an intimation of that in the last song, or Surrounded rather, which Kevin also wrote the lyrics for. So, who knows? Maybe his headspace he was in a place where these were the kinds of themes that were top of mind.
She has too much pride to pull the sheets above her head. So quietly she lays and waits for sleep. She stares at the ceiling and tries not to think. And pictures the change she's been trying to link again. But the feeling is gone, and water can't cover her memory, and ashes can't answer her pain. Give me the power to take breath from a breeze, echo life from a cold metal frame.
There are so many different ways that imagery can be taken. Like, as I was listening to it, kind of pulled into it, I thought of like 4 or 5 different ways. I don't feel like I should spend all the time going into those because those are subjective. But I guess at a higher level, it's part of the expertness of the lyric that it can give you, bring your own experience, maybe baggage, to the listening of them. Yeah, I miss him as a lyricist.
In with the ashes, or up with the smoke from the fire. With wings I've been
It's a transience about that imagery, right? Just like life is sort of transient.
heaven, or here lying in bed. Palm of her hand to my head. Now and forever could. In my heart of the world.
See, that ends, I mean, the whole song's got a little bit, even though it's so soft and beautiful, there's a little bit of darkness in it. And it's all redeemed in that last lyric for me. Now and forever curled in the heart of the world. It's like, there's this this touch of whoever the other is that gives you, that fortifies you against the transience of life, or the rough memories, the working through of days that can be so challenging. And that's part of the beauty of this song, is not just that the piano is beautiful, or that it's done in interesting time, or that James has this lush delivery. All of that's true. But that's something that has this kind of a lyrical darkness, not like darkness like gore, of course, or mean-heartedness or anything like that, but this sort of, I think I mentioned before, this thanatopsis, this rumination upon death or mortality, of painful memories and things that sort of destroy our spirit, that it is redeemed at the end with this line, this lyrical phrase. That's cool music, man. I mean, like, I get it that there's some music that's just about rock and metal, and I love that too. There's a place for that, and you want it, but it's bold for this record. Like, thinking now back to the whole purpose of me doing this video, this record that has done so many things that has, have, I think, kind of been bold for every player, in the consummate way that they have delivered on their performances and the songwriting and everything else. But now here's this song. Again, you could consider it balladesque, but it's just piano. It's not traditional piano. It's odd time and all of this other stuff, but it's bare in terms of orchestration relative to the rest of the record. And yet, in the deliverance of what Kevin's trying to communicate, because he wrote the whole of the tune, he does this thing, man, where it's not maudlin, it's not trite. In fact, like it's kind of the thing where the more you think about it, the more that there is to dig and plumb. And that, I think it typifies something that is true for a lot of Dream Theater music, and why, as much as there are other bands I really love, lots and lots of bands and other genres for sure, these guys, they're my desert island. And if I get just one record, this might be it. There's a couple that I'd have to probably smuggle. But anyway, that's one of the reasons why, simple as it is, short as it is, there's a lot to be said about Wait for Sleep in my mind. Okay, last track, Learning to Live. Known affectionately also as Creep with Tonality. That was the alternate name originally, I think, for it. This is the most classically progressive tune on the record, I think, in terms of just like the dynamics and the shifting parts and all of the things that are the hallmarks of progressive music. This is the one. I mean, the argument can be made for a lot of the record, but there's tracks that are certainly more accessible. This one's more for prog heads. All the polyrhythms in there, see, they all just they work together, at least for me. And restating what I think I said during the Metropolis, and frankly other places in the record for sure, the polyrhythms, they find a way for them to fall together pleasingly, even in the context of the broader progressive genre. I think it's why you'll hear the appellation sometimes of Dream Theater as the giants of heavy of progressive metal music. They've earned that. It's not because they were first, or even any of them are the best or fastest. I think it's this songwriting acumen that sets them apart. Okay, drops down into this cool breakdown. It's almost got like a Della Brown thing for me, and I love Della Brown, so that's a compliment. I think it's one of the really cool Queensryche tracks, but it's got this sort of in the city, maybe in a lesser trafficked part of the city vibe. Or at night, like when there's fewer people, but the raw essence of the city is visible. And I feel like I've not probably talked as much about My Young as I should have. I feel bad about that, actually, now that I think about it. Because there's no Dream Theater without John Myung. His stamp is as indelible as all the rest. It's just that as a personality, he's not as forward as the others. And there's the argument, like I said before, that there have been times in the mixes where he's not as forward as maybe he could have been. And we can debate that. People have different opinions. But here, there's a very simple line that is unique and musical, and it sets the stage and the feeling for what is about to come to bear in the lyrics that are Myung's himself. He wrote the lyrics to this song. It was the first time, I think it's the only track that he wrote on this record. And man, the lyrics are amazing. Could probably tie with my favorite lyrics on the record. Myung doesn't as often write lyrics. When he does, though, whoa.
Of hatred slips away.
I feel like when we hear John Myung write lyrics, we get a little peek into his soul. Like, I think he talks about things that matter to him, even if it's an expression and that is narrative or thematic. I don't know that. That could be me just sort of seeing it for what I want to see it. But it's certainly like the depth of the lyric is consistent with what I know of the man himself, which is, arguably not a lot, but, poignant.
Through winter the streets alone. He stops and takes a breath with confidence and self-control. I look at the world and see no understanding. I'm waiting to find some sense of strength. I'm begging you from the bottom of my heart to show me understanding. I need to live life like some people never will. So find me kindness, find me beauty.
I haven't talked a lot about the production, and I know that there were some, at least there's some stories about the tension in between the producer and the band. But there are some nice moments, like the doubling with James' voice, like adds a certain density to it that's really, really nice, precisely where the lyric needed it. So there's some good choices for sure in what's been done on the production. As a whole, there are records that do have better production. But I don't have a lot to say negative. Some of that, of course, is nostalgia for sure. But there are some good choices, like that right there really hit me.
When temptation brings me to my knees and I lay here trained of strength, show me kindness, show me beauty, show me truth. The way your heart sounds makes all the difference. It's what decides if you'll endure the pain that we all feel. The way your heart beats makes all the difference in learning to live.
The way your heart beats is obviously a metaphor. It has to do, I think, the way I read it is it has to do with your compassion, how you regard others, and that influences how you live. So it's important to get your heart right. Like that's my read on it.
Here before me is my soul. I'm learning.
And this whole idea of learning to live, like it's interesting because it has to do with the maturation process. I think about it now, like in the context of this video, looking back at a record that's 30 years old. Think about it. Like my young was a young pup when he wrote this, and yet looked at it with a certain wisdom that you learn how to live, like the trials you go through, sickness, loss of a mate, loss of a child, parent, health, hunger. Like there's no end to the things that happen to us in life. And I know that music doesn't always have to be about deep things, and needn't ever be about that for some people. That's fine, because music is subjective. We use it and need it in whatever way is best for us. But this song's not that. This song is hitting on some deeper themes for sure. And this idea of over time learning to live, with getting your heart in a place where you maybe exhibit compassion towards others. It's a cool thing that John chose to write about. And again, another like, wow, on this record, which is, I know it's their sophomore record, but in some regards, it's the beginning. The first record really didn't do a lot. And when they hit this moment in 1992, July 7th, 1992, all of these things kind of came into alignment. And I've tried to talk about many of the unique elements, the uniqueness of this record, in the various ways. But one of them, and it's kind of forcefully brought into focus on this track, is its willingness to kind of say important things. And obviously a lot of progressive music does that. But I find a lot of progressive lyrics, they usually feel like word salad. They usually feel like, oh, well, this guy's really trying to use as much language as he can. And the metaphors are so labored and et cetera. My young man is just the opposite. Like there's a certain subtlety and reservation in how he communicates the things he's trying to communicate. And yet he's addressing himself to something that's of import, at least in my mind. And I think in a lot of people's minds. And that in and of itself is kind of a bold thing. It's not delivered tritely. It's not delivered in a ham-handed way either. So kudos to my young.
I won't give up till I've no more to give. No more to give. Whoa! Listening to the city, whispering its violence. I set out watching from above. The 90s bring.
Now this dates it a little because he's saying the 90s bring new questions, but that's not the point at all. It's topical because at any time, the life and times we're in are presenting new challenges to us. I mean, gosh, do I need to even get into it from the past few years? 90s is just a lyric that abstracted means what you're going into, what you're facing presently. And so it's as meaningful now as it was 30 years ago.
New questions, new solutions to be found. I fell in love to be let down. Once again we dance in the crowd. At times I step away from a common fear that's all spread out. Won't listen to what you say. Once you touch, you're standing low to face the bitter fate. Once I reached for love, and now I reach for life.
That's an interesting turn of phrase, because in this very album, we've had songs that sort of reached for love as the pinnacle, as the ideal. Interestingly, here John's kind of got a different lens on it. He's, love is certainly an ideal, but man, there's times when that's not achievable. Maybe we can't find the right person, or we lose the right person, or we're with the wrong person. There's a lot of ways that we fall short of love or having love in our lives. At those times, it's enough just to live. And by that, I don't mean breathe. I mean, live with some sense of purpose, some sense of gladness. Gosh, man, that's Dickensian coolness right there. I don't know if John reads Dickens, but that's a heavy lyric in that it's it kind of looks past the obvious, and yet is obvious itself. That's a word salad by itself. What am I trying to say? It's when all else is lost, the things you can control have to do with your own self, right? And so you may reach for ideals, but at the end of the day, you can only control what you can control, which has to do with yourself, like your will, your choices. And I think that is part of what John's talking about here. And your choices are like a reflection of your heart, right? The way your heart beats makes all the difference in learning to live. Like what you choose to do, your actions are a reflection of who you are. If you're kind to your mother, if you are kind to other people, if you give time and service, if you don't do those things and are more selfish, those are reflections of your heart. And I think what John maybe is driving towards is learning to live. It's going to be individual, but a life well lived is a life lived that is not selfish, that is compassionate. At least that's what I'm taking from it.
Another chance to lift my life, a freedom sensation in my heart, to ride the wings of dreams into changing horizons.
So against the things you can't control, changing horizons, you can make choices to pursue things that make you happy. And that's everything from having a big music career, the way John Myung has had, to donating time down at the local food bank.
It brings in a peace within my mind, as I'm lifted from where I spent my life. I hear an innocent voice, I hear kindness
too much to say on that part. I'd be here for another hour. Cool patch choice too by Kevin there. And John Myung there's just doing some cool bass stuff to give flavor. Don't you just love how the restraint Kevin exercises through that part, not just in the sparseness of notes, but even in the volume of the notes, the suggestion of some of the tonal things as a reflection. This is just me ideating, but as a reflection of the heart of the character, the I in the narrative of this song. I don't know if that's conscious, but even if it's not conscious, we as musicians, as artists, we arrive at how we express things with the subconscious mind. That happens all the time. It's part of what's surprising and spontaneous and beautiful about music, and Dream Theater music in particular. Of a Spanish flair there, or is it just because it's the acoustic guitar? Either way, really cool combination of sounds, and yet another example of how the variance in this song is quintessentially progressive. Man, Portnoy's just going to town, man. So good and so tasty. And I love how in these parts it's not just shred. This is the great sort of miscommunication and disservice some do to Dream Theater in thinking it's just a wanker, because they're not listening to a song like this where each instrument is playing a part with sort of reserve as deference to what the song needs in terms of the emotional terrain it's covering and the build that it's using to get to the next section. You just closer listen, I think, would reveal the falsehoods of some of the way that people who don't understand the band talk about it. Okay, and this is the part that gives a lot of people chills. Me too. That high F sharp. Crazy. In the context of the song, like, you've heard of the barbaric yop, right? It's a a poem reference, Walt Whitman, I think, and this "Hear my barbaric yawps across the rooftops of the world," or something to that effect. And it's this like this primal thing. Kind of reminds me of a little bit too of Tears for Fears' "Shout." There was this sort of idea in therapy, I think, even sort of vocalizing this. But in the context of this song, this "Learning to Live," there's this moment that makes sense that James would do this thing where he's just letting it all out, like the emotion of tragedy or pain that's given life as you figure it out, like, and get to some evenness. I don't know. I mean, it's cool for itself because it's a great scream, but I think it's also contextually relevant. Such a great patch. Awesome. There's the wait for sleep refrain. Just listen to what, in that same musical figure, how Petrucci comes in with something just a little bit different. Counterpoint going. Still hitting all the same emphasis notes or beats. By the way, there was no time, no energy for anger. The sightlessness of hatred slips away. It's kind of a paraphrase of a quote from Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, which states, quote, "He had no time for pain, no energy for anger. Within a few weeks, it was over. The blinding sobs of hatred ceased and did not return." So at the very least, it's likely that John Mayung is somewhat familiar with Ayn Rand. That doesn't mean he's aligned with her in any other way, or it might. But at the very least, there's a connection there on the theme, or at least that part of the theme, which is really cool. There, it's how the heart sounds, not how the heart beats. Not that it matters, but. There it is. So cool. Into the coda. I guess it's not technically a coda. This is some of the same musical thing. But there are some new instrumental parts on it here. And the great epic fade. I feel like I hear other voices besides James in there. I don't know that for sure, but the tones are a little bit different, which is cool. The guy's in on the act. So there you go. A couple of other interesting factoids. Apparently, Don't Look Past Me was also going to be on this record. Originally, and it was cut. It was going to be the lead track. I'm not sure. I can't verify this, but some of my research suggests that, and then they replaced it with Pull Me Under, which, there you go. There's history being written. But Don't Look Past Me is an amazing track. There's a refrain or a section in that that says, if I can remember, when someone says their heart needs lifting, don't ask how come, ask how high. That hit me like a ton of bricks the first time I heard it. And I loved it so much that when I wrote my record, which I've talked about before, but my band's called Symphony North. We did sort of a holiday record. It's a kind of it's a concept album. It's like a rock opera, so to speak. But it's got a story. Anyway, the concluding song uses that idea. I told John, I said, I'm going to borrow that because it's so powerful. So it'd be interesting to see what would have happened if that had been on here. I suspect it would not. Dream Theater might not have had the altitude. Almost certainly not. I think Pull Me Under's the right track to have hit. But interestingly, that would have been a difference. Maybe we can thank the producer for that. I don't know. I don't know all the backstory on it. But that's my listen. I hope it's been entertaining, if nothing else. Certainly gone into some of the specifics of my thoughts about the record. If you haven't gotten a chance, check out what I was able to dig into with both John Petrucci and James LaBrie in conversations about this record. I'm fortunate that they are friends of mine and were willing to talk to me. And that sort of bromance began because of this album. And I've certainly not had the musical success those guys have had. Who has really? And I don't mean in terms of album sales. They've had their share of those. But I think more in terms of the creativity of their career and the music that they've contributed to the lexicon of progressive rock and metal. They've earned their place because of their commitment to their craft. And they set that bar with this record. So with that, I will leave you. I don't really make any money on this channel. I don't do it for that. But if you're interested in the kind of conversations I have, feel free to like or subscribe. Mostly just so you know I don't do these every week. I just kind of do them when there's someone that's willing to talk to me that I think would be really great to have a conversation with about this music. All right. Thank you, everybody. Take good care of yourselves. Bye-bye.